Before I get into the details, I'm delighted to have Mr. Prasad Chapikar, who's with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. I'll get him to say a few words quickly on on the risks and what Government of India's vision on green hydrogen and energy transition is, and then we'll deep dive into the topic of the day.
I'll just briefly introduce the mission for all those all a bit new. The mission has a target of 5 MMT of annual capacity of green hydrogen by 2030. The overall mission budget is $2.4 billion, and out of which $2.1 billion will go towards incentives for manufacturing of hydrogen and electrolyzer equipment. We have notified the scheme guidelines. The first bids are currently out. They will be concluded hopefully by the end of this year. We'll be awarding, we'll try, let's see how much time, it depends on when people ask. So it depends on the industry as well. So we are trying to get it done as soon as possible. Apart from that, we'll be doing pilot projects in industries like transport, shipping, steel. The scheme guidelines will be out shortly, maybe in a couple of months or so, maybe a little more than that. But by this year end, the scheme, the mission will be fully rolling. The current problems, which all of us know, are the price, the big price difference between hydrogen, which is grey and green, and since the capital cost is to be borne upfront, that is a huge risk for the producer. As I was saying, the biggest risks for the industry are in terms of the huge upfront capital investment. We have given extension for ISTS waiver for initial projects which come up till 5 years from now, 7 years, till 2030. We have given exemption. Means the ministry has given exemption from environmental clearance to green ammonia projects. We are further working on a slew of other measures apart from the incentives for improving ease of doing business. The empowered group, they have been given the authority of imposing the obligations of consumption. Of course, I don't have any fixed timeline for that, but I think that will, so if and when that comes, that will be the biggest risk. This is from the government's point of view. Of course, what we hear today is from a little different point of view. I guess it's the financing and other elements which can be done to bring the cost. Anyway, all the target is to bring the cost lower. The lower the cost, the lower the risk for the producer. So all our efforts for the government as well as the private industry is fully geared towards reducing cost of green hydrogen and then obviously green ammonia. With these words, I would hold my thoughts.
So any meeting, any conference you go to, you will find the issue of financing and the economics of hydrogen coming out very, very strongly. And ultimately, it all boils down to how do you make the market, right? And when we started looking at this particular aspect a few months ago, the trigger was a meeting in Delhi where a number of development finance institutions and industry people got together. And we started looking at the different types of risks. We started looking at the value chain. We started looking at what financing capacity and appetite exists. And what started to emerge is a very interesting and a very comprehensive framework and a structure where one needs to look at all the risk classes and the risk categories and start to price those risks. And once those risks are priced, one is able to develop the financing structure around it. And that's essentially the purpose of the call today. And I'm delighted to have a number of subject matter experts who will take us through the different risk classes. But let me paint the picture. Let me start painting the picture. We kind of divide the risk classes into two buckets: systemic risks, value chain risks. Now, the value chain risks are fairly sort of well known to us. It would trigger off with the development of renewable energy capacity or lack of in a particular market, round-the-clock power, grid integration, bringing storage online, bringing storage on stream is very much part and parcel of the value chain risk. The second in line would be your electrolyzers and green hydrogen production, including the derivatives that come out of green hydrogen, and a lot of the risks that get flagged technology and technology maturity risks, as well as the OEM supply side risk in terms of if you wanted to place an order today, when would you get your first set of electrolyzers? Moving further downstream is your storage and transportation risk. I don't need to tell you about that. Hydrogen storage is a significant engineering issue. One that is being, of course, dealt with by a number of engineering companies. And then finally, we hit the big frontier, which is the market side, right? So lack of markets would propagate all the way back the value chain. And we've started to develop a number of structures and frameworks around how do you stimulate the market. So these are the sort of value chain risks that we've identified. And then moving to the second larger bucket, which is the systemic risks. And of course, right at the forefront are policy and standards and regulatory risks in the system. And we are sitting in Government of India's office, and of course, that's a very topical issue in this building as well as in the entire machinery. Green hydrogen organizations working a lot on defining the standards, but today's call is of course not about that, and we'll take it up in other detailed meetings. So policy, standards, regulation is a big risk in the systemic framework, and the other aspects are the global macro, and I define the global macro as interest rates, inflation, which affect every economy, and particularly in bringing wholesale finance into the system. So as interest rates rise elsewhere in the world, money gets sucked out, and there's a flight to safety, and cash is always king in the investment universe. So cash starts to move to countries where interest rates are higher. How does this affect systemic risk in a country? If cash gets sucked out, there's less liquidity available. So I would say the credit supply risk then gets affected, which is how much money is available in the banking and lending sector, and how much dry powder, as we call it in private equity, is available in terms of risk capital availability. And finally, geopolitical risks in terms of wars and other critical aspects, so which affect every economy. So these are the sort of 10 risk buckets that we've identified, and under each bucket there's a significant significant number of subheadings. So overall, we can count on our fingertips more than 40 to 45 individual risks under the 10 major risk buckets that we have identified. And that's what I would like to bring out in the discussions today. And we've got a great set of lead discussants, Mr. Arun Sharma from Adani. Arun, last time we spoke, you were somewhere in Australia. I don't know which part of the world you are in, but welcome. Mr. Anjan Das Gupta from DSK Legal. Anjan joins from Mumbai, and additional colleagues who will also jump in from Green Hydrogen team in Geneva. Yeah, so these are the sort of three sets of discussants. Can I first invite Arun into the dialogue? Arun, the risk classes that we painted out or mentioned, perhaps your opening remarks and comments, and then I'll ask Anjan to give a slight detailed narrative on these risk classes.
I think I'll speak from the perspective of the role of green hydrogen in the decarbonization. There is no net zero without green hydrogen. It doesn't mean that green hydrogen will play a role in every sector, but there is a pathway for net zero, no matter whether you talk about thermal power or gas-fired power plant, or if you talk about, say, sustainable aviation fuel or shipping. It's the last mile of the decarbonization. But obviously, we have to bring the cost down, because net zero will happen for these sectors at a price point of green hydrogen. Now, I'll take a view, and I will actually come to the crux of the issue. How do we address the gap between the gray hydrogen and the green hydrogen going forward? Let's talk about the value chain risk. Given the price gap, I think one way to address the value chain risk is vertical integration. Without vertical integration, you are always subjected to, the value chain risk. Keeping it simple is going to be fairly straightforward. If you invest in technology that does require rare earths and things that can become scarce, then that is going to be a problem. So vertical integration does make a problem. Now, the case against vertical integration is what happens if there is a sudden technology change. Okay, that's where vertically integrated businesses suffer. In this case, you're not going to invest in green hydrogen projects, which are highly capex intensive, unless you have a 20-year takeoff agreement, okay, or offtake agreement. So somehow you are mitigating that risk because you are signing long-term offtake agreements before you invest in them. And the cost of an electrolyzer factory isn't a whole lot. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, we're all very pleased that the Indian government has come up with supply side incentives. And I think, they may not be like the IRA, and IRA has its own issues. But it is great that India has done supply side incentives, and many other countries have done supply side incentives. That is there. But we have to create demand side incentives. And why India can do demand side incentives is very simple. India spends 130 to 160 billion US dollars a year in energy imports. It actually is about energy independence. Green hydrogen produced from renewables provides for the first time a mechanism to get out of this debilitating yoke on the Indian economy, the cost of import of energy. And the second is, of course, air quality will improve as more fuel cells come into play. And the third is the net zero. So India will do it. And Jonas and I were talking, but before you create the demand signal, you have to define what is green hydrogen. Because the biggest systemic risk to green hydrogen is the blue hydrogen lobby. Okay? Because in the long term, it is very clear to everyone, even BNEF, that the cost of blue hydrogen has matured. It's not going to come down. And at some point in most economies, green hydrogen will overtake. But the danger for green hydrogen projects is that if blue hydrogen imports are able to lobby to get them out, they can produce at $1 a kilo per MMBTU of natural gas, a very, very cost competitive blue hydrogen or blue ammonia to just flood the market for the green hydrogen and the green ammonia industry from taking off. So countries have to defend that idea, and that I feel is the biggest systemic risk. So how do we address once there are demand signals? Because India has several regions to create a demand signal, and And the most important reason it can do is that India doesn't produce natural gas. So there is not a significant vested interest in trying to sort of slow down the green hydrogen sort of industry. Okay. Now, if you look at it, the viability gap funding has to be looked at in many different ways. And I'll just use some examples. And this is not Adani policy or anything. I, as a sustainability professional who has been looking at green hydrogen now for the last 4 or 5 years, this is some of my thoughts. So obviously, for India, the cost of capital is an issue. Okay. Can the global finance, or that part of global finance that wants to do good, can they work with the Indian government to say that for the hydrogen production or for green ammonia production, here is a input subsidy in the sort of renewable electricity that will make these things more viable. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Or can the MDB provide funding that isn't charity, but at least is comparable to the international sort of finance cost? Because that is a challenge for Indian companies. I think the Indian companies, by and large, everyone has figured out that they have to make their own electrolyzers. Okay, using Indian bill of materials, using Indian labor cost, because without that, in the short term, hardly anything will take off. Because of IRA, most of the European electrolyzer manufacturers are going to assemble it there. And I hear nightmare stories that we were talking about $700 to $800 per kilowatt capacity is now at $1,200 or $1,300 capacity. It won't stay there, but this is what's happening in the short to medium terms. So can some of that do-good finance also combined with the Indian PLI scheme to either at the hydrogen level or actually build more global capacity? It might get into some WTO territory, but if it is only for sort of the hydrogen that is consumed in the country, which is required for energy independence. So those are the creative things. Different sort of funders will have different appetite that we have to sort of look at it. And one final point, let me take green ammonia. Now, obviously, Indian government is looking at green ammonia mandate for fertilizers. Okay, there are certain issues that come there. Clearly, no one wants to increase the cost of fertilizers for the farmer. Okay, so how does even blending 5 or 10% ammonia, what does the cost increase for the end consumer? Can that be addressed? Because we have to take people with us. And so these are simple gap funding that not only helps the government create demand, but address the political issues that are there in its path. The other thing is we are looking at thermal power, for example. Okay, what is the pathway out of thermal power? Well, at a very simple cost, at around $1 a kilogram, using open cycle hydrogen turbines, you start getting peaking power that will beat batteries. Okay, and that may happen in India between 2035 and 2040. And as a hypothetical, at 70 US cents with combined cycle hydrogen turbine, you are producing baseload power at the top quartile of thermal power. And that could happen by 2040. Now, it's not saying that this is the way it will happen, but there is a pathway out. Maybe small modular reactors come in, maybe the pumped hydro goes up. What are we doing in the meantime? Can we combust green ammonia with coal in thermal power plants? Already the Japanese have demonstrated that it works. They're going to do that for the JIRA 1 gigawatt plant. 20% co-firing of green ammonia reduces the emissions by 19%. And if you take the upstream emission of fracking from the Permian Basin and bringing it down, then it is very competitive. So that creates another demand signal for green ammonia. And there is no issue about the farmer, but still, you have to worry about the thermal power producer who is now replacing 20% of the fuel by a fuel that is 5 times more expensive. Okay. And to implement this, you have to put $20-30 million in upgrading the nozzles. Okay. So can we look at Western countries funding those capex upgrades and make it part of the transition funding that they have already promised? So that is, and Jonas is aware of this argument I have been making, is that you don't have to fund, you just fund your companies so they can supply this to the developing world. And you are creating jobs in your country. And in return, you ask the developing world to mandate the adoption progressively. That creates the market side. So we have to start thinking all this. At the same time, once you adopt these technologies, there are carbon credits who come in. Okay. That is another part of making the viability of these decarbonization technologies happen. So there are my initial thoughts. Maybe there's a lot there, but happy to keep working with the team.
Great. Arun, thank you so much for those initial remarks. The biggest one I've identified as something that I personally, I know GH2 does and other team members do, but I had not thought the blue hydrogen versus green hydrogen risk as quite a significant one as being just portrayed. So very, very interesting one, and one we should discuss at detail. And I know Jonas will have a few things to say about it in a minute or two. But before I bring Jonas in, let me also bring other people who are the lead discussants. Tobias from GIZ in New Delhi. Tobias, I think you are on with us as well. So.
Let me congratulate Arun Sharma ji, sir. No, said it. Make offtake agreements happen. No? And what do we need to make those offtake agreements happen? There is always the discussion on creating demand in India. No, India already being the third largest grey hydrogen consumer and producer in the world. That puts you also on the map in definitely replacing part of this grey hydrogen by green. And then the question is, and Arun Sharma ji sir had touched it, why exactly didn't the mandate come? What were the specific nitty-gritties? No, certainly cost, but how this can be addressed? No, so why did the national mandate not come? But then we can also look into the global demand, and then that's where Germany and EU comes into the picture. No. I think everyone in this call is aware of H2 Global, HINCO tenders. No, then EU now coming up with the international part of the hydrogen bank, and there again we look into how do these offtake agreements look like. I think that was also touched. No, but do we in India really know how those offtake agreements look like? Do we know if we tackle the international market I'm talking about? Do we know what our international customers want? There is some trainings now ongoing. I think part of my team also participates in Germany on how offtake agreement design is looking like. Arun Sharma ji was mentioning 20 years, but maybe also 10 years are sufficient. No? But then what are the other conditions? And then certification was mentioned. And that's the second big topic, because if we look into the global demand and if we look into offtake from Europe, then certainly we have to also listen what Europe wants. And if the customer wants a green, which may not match 100% with the green that we in India here believe is green, then certainly on the political level, a lot of discussions may be able to kind of like identify the nitty-gritties. But if it really comes down to what we need, no, let's look into Renewable Energy Directive and the delegated acts and what is required, no, and then try to translate those kind of requirements, no, talking about no geographical correlation, talking about additionality. So I think no offtake agreements in terms of how do they really look like? Let's have a deep look into existing offtake agreements And then what could they look like specifically for green ammonia? And then how do we get the certification done to be able to also reach customers outside India? No? So that from a German perspective, I'm certainly not the one talking too much about how the blending quotas, how the mandates in India should come. No? So that I'm really keen to listen to the participants in this call. No? How do you see this to be tackled? No? So thank you very much from my side. Just for all of you, as you're well aware, Germany and India have agreed on the Indo-German Green Hydrogen Task Force, which is meeting frequently. There's a lot of bilateral agreements which have been signed on green hydrogen cooperation. So whatever it is that Germany can take part, please feel free to approach us. No, and yeah, big thank you to Green Hydrogen Organization for offering this platform to have this exchange happen between all of us. No, thank you very much.
Great, Tobias. Thanks for your opening remarks, and we all eagerly see how the H2 global auctions play out, and because that establish quite a strong benchmark for everyone else around the world. And in our design, we're also building a structure on how India could implement a similar model and framework to stimulate its demand both domestically and even internationally if possible. So so thanks for those opening remarks. Can I bring in Anjan Dasgupta from DSK Legal? Anjan, you've been a great supporter of Green Hydrogen Organization, particularly in the work you and your team have been doing on the contracting side, but focusing on risks as most lawyers do and specialize in. I painted a plethora of risks. Where do you see the biggest of the risk classes lie? Are they more systemic risks or more value chain risks?
Thank you very much, Sanmit, and thank you for this platform, and really good that we are discussing these issues early on, because that is extremely important. And like you rightly pointed out, we are working with the Green Hydrogen Organization to look at some of these issues, specifically on the contracting side, and also other multiple issues around green hydrogen. But in terms of the risks, as a lawyer, that I look at, and clearly, in a way, it is not different from some of the other risks that we see in other projects, whether it is renewable energy projects or thermal projects in India. The issue is with certainty and clarity, and there has to be a greater level of certainty and clarity in the policies that are coming out. And I'm happy to note that the government is really come together and working on this on a war footing, and trying to address this. And it is partly easier because it's absolutely starting from scratch to a certain extent. So things are much more easier to that extent. However, one of the issues we're already facing on the ground is there is some kind of disconnect, if I may say so, between the multiple agencies that are operating in India. And I think that is something which the government of India would uh, really do good for this sector, is to look at some kind of a one-stop shop in terms of regulations and policies. We all know there is Eminari, there is other various entities working, and lot of them are putting in a lot of effort to ensure that green hydrogen, the way we want to see green hydrogen, is out there from a policy perspective. However, what does happen is if you have too many of these regulations and regulators playing, it does become difficult for the industry and the stakeholders to grapple with what's what in terms of what's coming out from the central government. And on top of it, you also have the various state governments who are coming up with various policies to kind of see to it that green hydrogen sector is benefited. So I think for me, the most critical path would be to concentrate on the policy and the standards which are coming out from the government. Clearly, certainty and clarity is required, and also multiplicities of government organizations looking at this should be, in my view, reduced, and there should be one kind of nodal ministry coming out with regulations around all of this. I think that would really help in the regulatory framework around green hydrogen in India.
And can you just expand on when you say multiple ministries or different departments kind of fracturing the policy framework? Could you just elaborate on that with an
So
example?
what happens is you have like we just discussed, green hydrogen itself is not only production, right? It's also production. It is the transportation. It is the supply of water. It is the supply of green electricity, right? Plus on top of it, there are various other aspects around green hydrogen. So when I say that we should try and avoid multiple agencies, what I mean is there is MOPNG, who's I know for a fact MOPNG is also looking at few aspects of this. Eminari is looking at it. You also have BE, you have SECI, you have the state governments. So all that I'm saying is, I think there should be one nodal kind of agency, and though the central government, if I may add, is really pushing that, and trying to ensure that there is one entity looking at all of this. But there are still some confusion around all of this, and I think that should be clearly addressed quickly.
Great. Thank you, Anjan. You highlight multiple stakeholders, maybe not so much as pulling in different directions, but introducing their own dimensions into what the policy construct would look like. And that's what you're saying must be harmonized and streamlined. But I guess it'll be a work in progress for some time. So yes,
Yeah.
definitely a risk to be addressed. Can I? So thanks, Anjan. We'll come back to you shortly when we start the Q&A. Can I invite Santosh to give his expert remarks?
Yeah, so let me directly get to the point, right? I mean, the two or three points which I would like to kind of cover. First one is we are very slow. I mean, very simply put, 1 year back we were talking about the same things. Maybe fine, we have a little bit more. We have a little bit more of a policy framework. But what are we doing, right? Where are the projects? There's nothing happening at all. Where are the factories? There is nothing happening at all. I mean, nuance it a bit. Yes, something is happening, but most of what is happening is talk. Go to China, there are gigawatt factories left, right, and center. Electrolyzers, fuel cell, hundreds of megawatt grid scale projects, green hydrogen, application side, transport side. I mean, they're already like 20, let's say 20 steps ahead of not only India but then globally, if you look at it. And it's not like they have cheap quality products. I mean, the kind of things which they are working on, the kind of projects which they have, it's all temporal matching, right? It's all hourly matching. They have the technologies. The alkaline electrolyzers are being operated at 5% turn down, fast ramp up, fast ramp down, and we're still discussing here. Oh yeah, do we need temporal matching or not? Right? Is it going to be cost effective or not? So I mean, very honestly, like from our perspective, see, we do work quite a bit. All we do is hydrogen. We advise the Gujarat government, for example, with the green hydrogen policy. We work with a number of developers. We also work on the technology front. We do a lot of things on hydrogen, but all in all, the key takeaway, what we see and what we observe is that we are very, very slow, and all we are doing is just talking rather than taking real concrete steps. And that has to change.
Santosh, if I may just butt in, can you articulate that your answer or your comments in a risk framework? Where do you see the risks are? So if you say the speed of execution is a risk, but then I think Anjan's already mentioned that in terms of how the mandate's getting driven by multiple ministries. So
let me talk about that, right? So here, or at least what we observe in India and many parts of the world, this entire hydrogen economy is looked at from a commercialization perspective, from a forward integration of renewables perspective, from basically making more money, right? However, this is a decarbonization problem. We need to look at it from a different angle, right? If we keep looking at it, when will my IRR come? When will my offtake risk get solved? When will, let's say, government give these kind of mandates and security so that I can make more money? I mean, honestly speaking, I don't think it's going to work because hydrogen does not have a business case right now. It's not going to have a business case for the next 2 years or 3 years. It will take a long period of time. So if we look at it completely from a business angle rather than from a decarbonization angle, that's where the crux is, right? And talking about risk management, right? I mean, I agree. The risk here is the climate, is the planet. I mean, it's that. It's not, are we going to lose money or our offtake contracts not going to be signed? The longer we wait, every second we wait on discussions rather than actual action, then we are going to get set aside or step back by several years, right? So the risk, that's where it starts. And I think we are not even talking about it. We are addressing it. Like every hydrogen conference, every hydrogen presentation starts with, yeah, global warming, climate change, blah, blah, blah. But then we forget about it. Then we all talk about is how we can make more money and how it can be capitalized and how can it be looked at it from a financial standpoint rather than from a decarbonization standpoint. So first, if we accept it, that we need it now, we don't have time over 20 years to solve the problem. That's when it kind of gets started, right? And with that framework, we might look at the risks also differently, right? I mean, talk about lower returns, talk about, let's say, government backing a lot of these projects from a financial risk standpoint as well, because this is a central problem. It's a survival of the planet and humanity problem, right? It's not, let's just reduce some carbon emissions. I mean, it is mandatory, right? So the vantage point has to change, and that's where we are getting it, I think, wrong.
Thanks, Santosh. So speed of execution is perhaps your biggest set of recommendations. So look at how China is industrialized, and we should mimic that. But I'll only comment the climate risk is an existential risk that applies to everything under the sun, and ultimately the big fight is how do you price that risk and who pays for it, right? And that's the debate which is rearing everywhere in the world in every conference and policy room on Earth. So what we want to do is try and sort of divide the overall risk matrix into different components so we can price those risks, identify, segment and price those risks. And if you can price the risk, you can insure it. If you can insure it, you can fund it, right? That's really the strategy that we are following. So we'll bring you back again, Santosh, into the discussions when we open up the floor. Can I request my colleagues from Geneva, Jonas and Ines for their sort of expert remarks, and then we'll invite everyone else in the room to contribute and comment.
Amit and Nish, well done for getting such a great group together, and hi everyone, and thank you, and Tobias and Arun and all our friends. I think that we don't need to spend that much on describing now. All is a question of to to Santosh's comments, how do we make it happen faster? Arun made a couple of proposals. He said he talked about the long term, and he spoke a little bit, as we have heard from others, about some of the demand things that the government, not least the Indian government, can come up with. I think it's incumbent of us to see how can we better support the government, how can we better feed in to our colleagues at MNRE and elsewhere for precisely what kind of demand signals and framework that we think the industry can benefit reasonably from. And somewhat related, the multilateral development banks and also commercial banks, they are asking, what can they do? So there are some specific things with this industry, the sheer size, the fact that it is new, and a couple of other things. So in light of that, what else can we ask from these development banks and others? What can they do that we would find helpful, that would make the numbers start to work, that would close the gap between gray and renewable or blue and renewable? I would leave conversations about standards and so on for other times. There are so many other conversations about that. So I think if we can really try to narrow it down to what else can be done to make it happen faster in the Indian context. I guess to Arun, I would have a question. You talk about long-term contracts. Are there things that we can do as we try to get this to become tradable products? Are there things we can do on a global trading scale that would take us further towards such contracts that you can think of? And then when it comes to the multilateral development banks, there are a number of proposals here. I think some of it probably is straddling, if you like, country risk with commercial risk. So we need the private sector windows and the guarantee windows to work better together. Quite often we've built sort of walls between these instruments, and we now need to make sure that there is good practice while at the same time possibilities to work across the guarantee aspects and the handling of the commercial risk. So those would be some of the areas where I think that, or where I hope that a group like this will come forward with some more concrete suggestions. Thank you.
But Jonas, I think before moving forward, I would like to make a point that, at the end of the day, since we have to do globally, collectively so much together, we don't have to talk of a particular country today. We have to talk of the global problem, and we have to see that, we are not talking only in respect of India. In fact, India may be in a much better position to produce for being used elsewhere in the world. It may not be in a position because domestic paying capacity of quite a few sectors could be significantly lower. Yet, India might have advantage in terms of lower production if the supply chain issues were to be addressed collectively. If we were to discuss it country by country, then it might not be the most optimal way.
I can take up on Jonas's point if that's appropriate. So a few points that are coming, and I also pick up on Santosh's point. The long-term contracts are to get the industry going by reducing the overall cost of the technology. Pilots are not going to do it. Small-scale projects are not going to do it. So the long-term contracts give you that confidence. Again, it can't just be dependent on the demand in India. So almost every large Indian player is looking at exporting. Now, that has to be the case. And there are countries that, Germany is an example, and Japan and Korea are also looking at it. They will be looking at sort of this in a significant way. And I do suspect that export from India will play a very important role. So it is a global problem. I totally agree with you. But Jonas, you raised the issue of making green hydrogen a tradable commodity. Okay. I think that's the end game. The challenge we have with making green hydrogen a tradable commodity is the distribution and transmission infrastructure is a challenge, because you trade, then your wholesalers are buying it, then supplying it to small users. So I think the intermediate proxy is to make green ammonia into a tradable commodity. Okay, that in a proxy is creating the green hydrogen as a tradable commodity. And of course, the standards become important, but a certification mechanism will also be required. So a certification mechanism, because green ammonia doesn't have the problem of hydrogen. See, in India, green hydrogen, even at the current cost, can kill diesel. But it is not the green hydrogen cost, it is the delivered cost of green hydrogen, which almost triples the cost to a truck fueling station. Whereas in case of green ammonia, the delivered component is not that big. We already have the mechanism to move ammonia around. So I think our aim is to make green ammonia a tradable component, and that will require a small amount of work. Coming to Santosh's point, I think you're right. We are slow. Now, most businesses, what we can get them to do is pilots. And pilots are important because we learn. We went to Caterpillar and Komatsu and asked them, can you supply hydrogen fuel cell mining trucks? And they said, come to us in 2028. Okay, they have no interest in doing it. So we followed up, we saw how Anglo-American, the only mining company in the Western world that has gone into hydrogen fuel cell trucks, we took a learning out of them. And then we found, we almost arm twisted Ashok Leyland and Ballard to produce fuel cell trucks. We ordered 3 fuel cell trucks. We are hoping that the first one will be delivered before COP28. Okay. Now, this is going to provide learning to Ashok Leyland. It will provide learning to Ballard. And of course, it will provide learning for us to do that. We will hopefully do a pilot for ammonia co-firing in that. But a business cannot adopt the technology unless the regulatory framework exists. The businesses are here to make money. The government has to come up with a fair regulatory policy, and the do-good finance, whether it is the Bezos Foundation or the Gates Foundation or our valuable multilateral development banks, have to come into the party. That's what's going to scale up. And I think this is where the Green Hydrogen Organization can play a fairly important role.
The points that Arun and everyone else make, speed is of essence, but speed is very much a function of clear signaling. And I couldn't agree more that pilots is the way forward, right? Because pilots is not, I think it is that pilots is essentially trying to prove technologies. No, actually, pilots is trying to find price discoveries. Pilots are trying to establish the boundary conditions and stress test the policy framework. So no regret projects is what the need of the hour is. And we should not try and attain 15, 20% IRR on every project we do under the sun. So point very well taken by all the commentators that speed is of essence, but let's try and find that speed from doing commercial scale pilots is I think the message I'm hearing, Arun, from you, from Santosh as well, and others as well. I don't know, Yunus, I don't know if I missed Ines speaking. Did she?
No, I mean, I'm just learning so much from the really excellent comments that have been made, and I guess yeah, picking up a bit on what Arun was saying about development finance institutions and their role. That's obviously work we have been doing globally. We have been looking at the sort of blended finance mechanisms and the ways that development finance institutions could perhaps operate a little bit differently. The different types of co-financing. More sort of financing through blended finance funds that we're increasingly seeing play a key role in bringing on private capital. So yeah, I think this is what's great about this initiative. I agree that these two, it's a global picture. Things like contracts for different schemes now in Japan and South Korea, for example, will obviously have also play a key role, hopefully, in bringing in finance for projects in India. But at the same time, really looking at what are the specific risks for the projects in India, what are concrete measures. We don't want blended finance to just be yet another buzzword, but what are the more specific risks that development finance institutions in particular can help, can offer and to mitigate risks for projects in India. And for us, it's really important, obviously, to hear from the private sector, but also from private capital. What's holding things back, and what's really what's needed to kind of de-risk more structurally the project in India. So I think this is something that hopefully this group can also really tackle, and I think we have the right people around the table.
Great, thank you, Ines. Let's perhaps sort of delve deeper into some of the risk classes that we mentioned. How big is from the technology experts in the room? How big is the technology maturity risk? If someone wants to comment on that.
I mean, I would divide that technology maturation risk into exactly what, right? On the production side, when we're talking about electrolyzers, specifically alkaline electrolyzers, I don't really think it's a risk. I mean, there are already, large scale projects which are demonstrated, build manufacturing capacity in place. I mean, of course, it will take kind of, none of them has run for 20 years, but we don't need to run them for 20 years to see if it works. So, and also the cost curves have achieved quite a bit of improvement, specifically from Chinese electrolyzers. I mean, IEA has talked about increasing prices, specifically in Europe and the US. But overall, if you see the technology and the technology side, I don't believe that alkaline electrolyzers have a problem from that sense. When we move to the second bit, right? So the second bit on the storage part and the transportation part, I mean, so there is definitely a lot to do, right? I mean, we are still talking about hydrogen, high pressure hydrogen storage, where from technology side, again, it's mature. It's more the cost curve which needs to come down. But then gaseous hydrogen storage has its own challenges from a scalability perspective as well as from a safety perspective. Multiple alternate storage mechanisms such as let's say metal hydride based storage or LOHC based storage, or on multiple kind of alternative mechanisms which could make much more sense, still are in early TRL levels, not early but kind of mid TRL levels. So that's where a lot can be done, right, and should be done on the storage side, storage transportation to some extent. On the application side, there is an entire suite which still needs to be developed. I mean, fuel cells do have a certain maturity. I mean, of course, I mean, a Toyota Mirai runs and it works. So see, there is a technology maturation over there, but it's very difficult for any player right now to beat those dollar per kilowatt levels which Toyota has achieved, right? And we don't know if Toyota is making money from it or losing money from it. So on the fuel cell side, there is quite a bit. There's very little standardization. A lot of customization is still required on bespoke fuel cells for different applications. Quite minimum integration, let's say, with the entire cloud. We're talking about microgrids, then the renewable integration, temporal integration, all that is kind of lacking. So on the application side, there is far more to be done on the technology front. I mean, of course, the conventional industries, let's say, which are already using hydrogen, that can already absorb the green hydrogen which is coming in. But yeah, the question there is more around are they the right industries to target from a overall decarbonization perspective? Like, for example, I mean, if you are replacing hydrogen in a refinery, the total emissions of diesel is primarily scope 3. We are reducing scope 1. So the total emissions there would go down by maybe 5%, right? I mean, so is it the right application? But topic that aside, overall application front, there's more challenges. Storage front, there are also challenges. And there is a lot happening, definitely. And that's where, let's say, a good amount of capital is required, both on a venture level, at a venture level, and also at a growth and a private equity level to kind of scale those up. I mean, as I already said in my previous bit, that for example, we know cases where there have been like 4 or 5 electrolyzer or fuel cell factories being set up in China, and government has put 120, 150, 200 million dollars just as grants, right? I mean, without any expectation of return as well. So that's like, big money, and that's the big money we'll need as well. I mean, IPSCI funding is very interesting. What's happening in Europe with IRA, a lot of things will happen in US as well. But overall, the scale up of infrastructure needs a lot of capital, both on the technology maturation curve as well as scale up level. So that's where, kind of blended finance as well as growth capital.
Thanks, Santosh. Maybe just one more point. If you speak to any financial institution, particularly lenders, they require 5-7 years operating data on any new technology that's being adopted. Otherwise, they're not going to lend. And the result of that is they are asking for corporate guarantees, which means the balance sheet has to fund the projects, and you're not going to get project finance. So do you not think it's incumbent upon the technology companies and the OEMs to kind of both articulate and explain the risk and performance criteria better to the banking institutions?
You're right. I think it's both ways, right? One, there has to be an understanding and let's say articulation that needs to happen. But I would say more than anything else, the banking institutions and the lending institutions have to realize that we do not have time. I mean, we are talking about existential crisis here, and they are still using their old methods to evaluate some things, right? I mean, if we kind of keep waiting for that long, then we are beyond that 1.5, maybe we're beyond that 2, right? And then there is nothing to lend for. I mean, we'll be then lending for dikes and dams and underground cities underwater. Sorry, but something so on those lines. So rather than that, we need to kind of also relook on how the lending institutions look at it, eventually looking at it as a wider kind of risk portfolio, and kind of assess it in a different way, because there is no other option. I mean, we need to change the way we think, especially on financing of green hydrogen technology improvements as well as green hydrogen projects.
Of course, the financial institutions want long-term operating data before they invest. And this is where, again, looking at green ammonia, because an ammonia plant is an ammonia plant, whether it is green ammonia or the normal ammonia, blue, gray ammonia. Okay, that's operating data is already available. And the capex of the ammonia component so overwhelms an electrolyzer factory is how you have to start thinking of it. The problem is, if we keep thinking about electrolyzers, the entire focus is on making it work. But the moment it becomes part of a vertically integrated chain, okay, you've got the solar panels, there is no issue there. Wind turbines, there is no issue there. Electrolyzers, okay, do you have 7-year data? You got the ammonia factory, that's there. You're talking about 90% plus of the capex already sorted. Okay. So again here, in the intermediate term, we have to focus on green ammonia, for which the transportation and the infrastructure already exists. And Jonas's point of making it tradable will create multiple demand is actually to make green ammonia tradable. And I think that's the way we have to start thinking. The moment a hydrogen project proponent comes, at what price point are you getting your renewable energy? You have lost the plot. That's 75% of the cost of green hydrogen. So you're already giving margins to someone who is giving margins to a solar panel manufacturer who is giving margin to a wind turbine manufacturer. Okay. So this is where, at this stage, large-scale projects need to go so that they can bring down the cost curve. And this is where, whether it is multilateral development agencies or certain rich foundations, they have to get a few of these projects going.
I noted, Arun. Thanks. Moving on to a different risk category, and I'll come back to the market side, where tradable instruments. So the ease of trade is very, very important. Ines mentioned about CFDs. Arun, you've stressed upon bringing the MDBs and the do-good capital into the mix. A lot of the financial institution, and I say it in the investor community, the ultimate capital group is the institutional money, right? The pension funds, the insurance funds, sovereign funds who have a longer term horizon, and the asset liability mismatch in shorter horizon projects doesn't quite fit well with their investment strategies and thesis. So they want to decarbonize. If you talk to insurance industry, the levels of uninsured risk are skyrocketing. And if those risks are not contained, there will not be much left to insure, as we are seeing in real estate damage caused by climate catastrophes. So it's incumbent again, and many of the institutional money, investors are very keen to put money behind projects like the ones we are talking about. But the complaint that we get from them is you don't make investment easy. So let me articulate. So if I take the Norwegian sovereign fund, they invest in two asset classes primarily: a listed security, whether it's bonds or equities, and real estate. Right? Now, when it comes to listed securities, many of the companies are still private, right? So a Norwegian sovereign fund cannot invest in a private asset class. Many of the other institutional investors cannot invest outside OECD countries in their charter. So we don't yet have those pipes and structures coming fast enough which connect the demand side of money, which is in high growth markets, to supply side of money, which is still sitting in the developed world. So this creates another sort of capital credit supply risk, which we have not addressed. And one of the things you will hear from us in the subsequent webinars is how do we unlock capital from listed listed funds and listed structures. But I want to highlight two very big risk classes. One is the availability of capital both on infrastructure as well as availability of capital on the offtake. Now, the mismatch, of course, we can look at ammonia. The mismatch between the cost of blue ammonia and green has to be funded by a contract for difference mechanism. There's a growing movement in India to alter the carbon markets. So I'd like to invite anyone from the panel, if they have a view on how this delta of cost of either between green and blue, or cost of levelized cost of hydrogen produced and levelized cost of hydrogen delivered, how can this be funded? Anyone in the room?
Additional Chief Secretary Kerala. See, one or 2 points. Anyway, thanks. Just listening to the entire talk. It's as you said, systemic risk. I find that global standards. This is a global issue. So we need to have global standards. If you need trading to happen, unless you have a standard, now natural gas or something, you can trade across the globe. So first thing is you need to set up the standards. At least India has developed its own standard, but we need to have global standard for trading. Second point is we need to have a platform for a trading platform or you say you don't have derivative, not trading platform. You need to have a derivative market so that there's a you then only funds will flow. Otherwise, it's like a barter system we started, and probably Kerala being the land of first disruption in the spice trade is the world's first disruption. We are in an era where there is a lot of disruption happening. In fact, we are in touch with some companies which is already H2 Pro in Israel, who has developed technology, but $1 without, it's a membraneless electrolyzer without with the lowest OPEX and lowest CAPEX, 42 units per kg of hydrogen, which is one of the lowest, and CAPEX is also one of the lowest. So I think a lot of disruption is happening in the technology space. A lot of disruption is happening in the world, in the energy sector. So I think this, our conventional answers won't help. So one suggestion is, okay, standards, then regulation. I think Mr. Santosh has mentioned. I think it is partly correct. You need to have see, in China, in fact, earlier I called the bid for hydrogen buses much before the COVID. So, I was getting all the lowest rate from China, because you have got only one ministry or one idea, and then everybody works around that. So we have got multiple ministries. Probably, I think regulation, for example, PESO handles, then the motor vehicle ARI handles, like that. Various ministries are there. I think it will be good to have maybe one ministry exclusively for this, which will integrate everything. So the regulatory framework is, so that risk can be addressed. Then you are asking about the how do you fight the fund? I was talking to Mr. Junaid Ahmad. So he was telling that he is now heading the MIGA, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. So they, instead of a lending organization, the World Bank and all these multilateral funding agencies has to become leveraging institutions. See, lending was there when poverty was there. I think that stage is gone. I think leveraging is where wherever you can fund, whether it is public sector or private sector, where your returns are assured or a long-term contract is there, I think they are willing to give the guarantee, because otherwise the states has got FRBM Act, you limit the 3% of GDP or maximum up to 5% only you can borrow. So I think that is one area where we need to, like my own KCB is willing to borrow 50,000 crores because he can sell the power. There is already a market. So I think those, maybe DEA has to do that. DEA has to allow states or entities to borrow, even private or government sector. There is enough money. Otherwise, this, as you said, flight of capital, where in Inflation Reduction Act, they suck the entire capital of the world. So I think this is a very important that we should allow MIGA to. So they have, in fact, funded 75 billion worth of projects using only 500 million or so dollar as a guarantee. I think this is one opportunity. Then another green bonds is another, like capital gains bond. When REC was one project, which is REC, most of us have invested in REC because you get long-term capital gains exemption. So a lot of money will flow. I'm sure that's a good model, at least for the domestic market. Then global trading platform, as you said, RERTC. Now you need pumped storage. You need a lot of investment has to come into pumped storage to balance this thing, or battery plus solar. Now at 5 rupees, Chhattisgarh, Seki tender, they give it at 5 rupees. So you need to make, say, for example, ammonia to be globally competitive. I've been in touch with FACT, Fertilizer Secretary, all the union secretaries, as well as the companies. So, they ask, they say that it fluctuates between $200 to $1,200. Then they see nobody will take a risk. Central PSUs, especially norms, do not allow. They say, can you give it at the lowest rate? Then I found, if I can give power at 3 rupees, two companies which have come forward to invest, both HLC and PFC, they have said, give me power at 3 rupees and land. That's enough. Remaining things, whatever you give to other industries, you give me. And give me area near the port, so that in the infrastructure which is required for the storage, pipeline and export and the liquid jetty, those infrastructure need to be invested. And so the power at 3 rupees. So why I'm now working out a package by which, daytime I can give solar hours, I can give it at less than 3. But in the nighttime, non-solar hours, how can we subsidize 2 rupees so that it becomes, your ammonia will be globally competitive? None of the Indian companies, we import the 21.7% of the global ammonia import is only into one country. So it's a huge market. Let me tell you, in fact, in global trade, this is very important, because last time I was in the World Hydrogen Summit where Morocco, they were looking at Morocco investment in Morocco. You know what the bankers asked? How do you suppose this ammonia is not consumed or hydrogen is not consumed? How do you sell it? So what is that's a greater risk. Then they said, okay, I need a guarantee by the insurance company. None of the European banks were willing to fund the projects in Morocco, and I think it didn't take off. Otherwise, they were about to announce that Morocco is going to be the destination for Europe's energy demand. Anyway, it's a good opportunity for India. Now, another risk, as I said, infrastructure is another big thing. Somebody was telling about distribution and transmission. Same way, infrastructure. As I said, now for even ammonia, low-hanging fruit is ammonia, methanol. Methanol also, Musk is now tying up with the Cochin shipyard and all to make shipping area, you can use it. Then HICE to start as a first step for the in the mobility side. Even Cummins also is going into HICE engines. So then power generation, you need to explore other than PSP, ASMR. We have got a lot of thorium deposits. In fact, we are in touch with the Atomic Energy Agency, how we can use the power for next 100 years, the cheapest power. Then biogenic hydrogen is another. Ethanol is another thing which is now emerging. Ethanol, you can transport it and you convert into SAF or hydrogen. In fact, Tuticorin port is already going for ethanol, and now I think other ports can take it. Probably we can also take it from there. That's an easy way to transport. So methanol, green ammonia, then ethanol. I think these are the three things which might be the immediate to start with. Probably we will go into liquid hydrogen in the long run. Maybe next 10 years, we need to have now at least the technology is developed now, which is whereby you can liquefy using the cold energy from LNG. And now next one is you need to have the infrastructure both for exporting or importing or for storage. I think you need so you need to have develop ships also which can carry this. Only 3 companies have developed the technology: McDermott, Kawasaki, and Electro. I think these are the risks as far as I find in the hydrogen trade. Now, blockchain-based certification for the green power is already developed, like Power Lodger in Australia. They are already developed. I am also working on a project by which we can make exchanges across the globe, and then we can have blockchain-based certification to certify green hydrogen once the global standards are finalized. I think these are some of my suggestions. Thank you for giving an opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Jyotilal, and as always, encyclopedia of information. So one point you mentioned was bringing DEA into the dialogue. So Department of Economic Affairs in Ministry of Finance, those who don't know, and as a sovereign, any external liabilities that get created, it's a DA's responsibility to ensure those liabilities are well contained, of course, with the central bank. So, Mr. Jyotilal, we know there is a pinch point of states not being able to issue bonds directly. I know the state of Kerala did a infrastructure bond, I think on the masala bond market on London Stock Exchange, but that market has not really kind of deepened, and we identify that as a critical risk. And this was my point, that we are not putting structures enough to tap into the global money markets. So thank you for highlighting. But is there a specific point on DEA and the states interaction that we should highlight and specify so that we can take it up with them?
Yeah, I think MIGA guarantee for the state entities or any even a private entity, we should allow commercially viable project. They should be allowed to borrow from any of the multilateral lending agency with a MIGA guarantee, so that the state sovereign guarantee from the state side is not required at all.
We have a workshop on guarantee instruments alone in the next couple of weeks, so we'll bring this topic up at that point. So thank you for highlighting that. I have a hand from Carolina from World Bank. Carolina, you're calling in from DC?
The topics that you are bringing here is something that, as Jonas and other colleagues were saying, are specific to India, but are also being shared with all developing countries around the world, all the client countries that we are working with. And the way that you have tackled the risks and the structure in which you have put it, that will let financiers, either they are MDBs or private sector, come and bridge the financing gap, is a great start. So I want to say that from the World Bank Group, we are supporting client countries to identify exactly these risks because some of them are more prominent than in certain countries than in others. Political risk, for instance, in India is something that no one is seeing as something relevant, whereas in other countries in Africa, that would be the main issue. But all this to say that we believe that with new and innovating the financial instruments that we have, but keep on the legacy of providing concessional finance and see how this can also be put into mechanisms that can eventually go to the private sector or unlock the private sector participation is something that we're working with, and also on designing what are the risk mitigation instruments. For instance, we have discussed the technology risk, and this is something that in the financing that the World Bank is providing to Chile, for the first time, we are absorbing that risk. So in case the electrolyzer is not performing properly and the key performance indicators are not being met, there will be a liquidity account that will be triggered from the World Bank, and the World Bank will be covering 6 months of operations maximum in case it's not working. Because also here we need to say that although it's a technology that it's well proven, the scale in which we want to have the projects is not yet seen. So it's not the same having a 25 megawatt stack than a 20, 100, or a gigawatt. So this is what we want to do with these new risk mitigation instruments, and also towards what was mentioning before from other colleagues. We're working as a World Bank group. So today I'm not I believe I'm the only one, but I will also be passing this knowledge and information to our IFC and MIGA colleagues, so that we can offer a different portfolio of instruments for the projects, and we collaborate with government entities, but also private sector. So again, thank you, Sanmit, for this great session, and looking forward to participate in the other ones. I'll wake up at 5:30 because really they are very interesting and a lot to learn.
Thank you, Carolina. Look, oh my God, this is a high-fi moment. We've been saying a liquidated damages insurance is so critical. And that was my point earlier, where a lot of the banks, yes, as we understand technology, trains don't allow us to lend to the project because we don't have the operational data. And a liquidated damages insurance as a performance guarantee coming into the project can unlock a lot of commercial finance. And I know of a few other very large risk issuers, and underwriters. They're very happy to introduce a product alongside the guarantee instruments coming from the multilateral. So great news. Would love to know more about this particular product. So thanks, Santosh. You had a hand up.
Yes, a very quick thing, right? I mean, you had asked one question earlier before Honorable ACS talked about how do we bridge that gap between, the current prices with regards to LCOH, levelized cost, and what is it, right? Right? I mean, how we look at it is slightly different. Rather than looking at the levelized cost of hydrogen or ammonia, we should rather look at the price of the end product, right? Let's take a refinery, for example. Even if you double the cost of hydrogen, your gross refinery margin is hardly going to change by 5% to less than 5%, less than 2% even, right? When it comes to fertilizer, it's a different story. I mean, but then still, it's such a subsidized market that there's a lot of financial engineering which can be done over there from a central finance level, at least in India. And the end price would not, it's not like, so almost there are no applications where you double the price of hydrogen and then the price of the end product gets doubled. So there's a very big range where there's a lot of nuance that can take place, and that's why we should look at, because what's the point of looking at the feedstock, right? I mean, if the end product is not changing that much, and maybe that 2% or 5% or 1% can be absorbed by the end consumer or partially by yourself from your gross margin decrease, and partially from the end consumer that nobody looks at. So, these are the kind of things which are very easy, low hanging fruits. But then there's too much focus just on the cost of hydrogen and just on the cost of ammonia. So I think if we can also look at that approach, and perhaps, organizations such as yourselves, GH2, as well as some of the development banks can look at it that way, the risk profile is also very different, right? I mean, from that perspective. So maybe some food for thought.
This propagates across the value chain, and it's way too easy to kick the can down the road and say the consumer has to bear the cost, right? And if the consumer is unable to bear the cost, then let's go to the taxpayers, and financing efficiencies available throughout the value chain. Like liquidated damages insurance is one such product, right? If that insurance product, I don't know the pricing yet that the World Bank is going to ask, but whatever that may be, it's gonna be cheaper borrowing money either from your balance sheet, which is seeking 50 efficiencies available throughout the value chain that we must explore together, and then arrive at hopefully a much lower delta between the cost of hydrogen that the market can bear and what the production cost, or rather the delivered cost, is. So are there other risks that we have not addressed in the value chain or in the ecosystem? Anyone wants to bring out a point or two?
Yeah.
Steve from ADB.
Thanks, Samnet.
Thanks for joining in.
Thank you very much. I'm with the Asian Development Bank, for those of you that don't know me. We are just late to the party on hydrogen, but we're very interested to be involved. Recent trip to India, where I think it was 2 weeks ago, Sunmit, we had a chat in our office. Two things that came out of that trip that were, one, that there is a perceived lack of technical leadership and operational capability at an industrial level with a lot of the organizations we talk to. So that's one area where we can deploy funds to support that upskilling. That's something we're going to look at. The other issue was that there is a sort of lack of understanding of where the interventions can be done. And I don't mean in terms of electrolyzers. I mean in terms of, for instance, a steel mill. What does a steel mill need to do? How does it need to make itself efficient? So not confining a discussion to green hydrogen only, but green hydrogen as a tool for decarbonisation. And it's one of a number of tools that we can use. I think that there's a range of products that we can look at putting to work here. The liquidated damages insurance product sounds like a great idea, and ADB can come in and provide some lending, co-lending on that if they're asked to. We commonly co-lend with IFC and World Bank. So that might be a product that will be useful. We're getting a lot of interest from the so-called, as you called it, the do-good money. So looking at developing products that can look at viability gap financing is very useful. I would ask, though, that we should be careful of talking up problems and be more focused on figuring out what we can do. I'm sorry to call you out on this, everybody, but it's not somebody else's fault. We all have a job to do. And I think if it becomes a bit less, it can't, you'll find probably it will happen. So that was, I don't mean to be rude, but it's probably a little bit forward. But I will say one thing, India is really on fire when it comes to looking at hydrogen. You've got Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan are trying to play catch up, but you're right in front of the pack, and it's all happening there. So I look forward to seeing some of you on my next trip to India in November, and hope to do more work with you guys in GH2. Thanks.
No, so thanks for that. The point I wanted to make, Steve, is like everyone's saying, let's not talk about the problems. Let's talk about the solutions. The one question that we still haven't answered is how do you create a leverage effect? Mr. Ajay Banga, the new president of the World Bank, when he was in India a few weeks ago for the G20 summit, he said, look, unless we are multiplying development capital 30 times, 40 times, it's just not worth it. So So how do you go about doing that? Steve, maybe you can answer, and then perhaps I can invite Donald from EIB to comment on that as well.
So just very quickly, one of the things, ADB was set up for just that reason, to be able to raise money from capital markets for developing member countries. So if you look at what we're trying to do, we're looking at a multiplier which is about 25 to 30 times. That's pretty much the number we're looking at. And we can do that through a range of ways. We can do that by providing sovereign funding for where it's a sovereign problem. For instance, like, is there capability development, or is there work that's required on complying to international standards? It doesn't matter if you release a standard if you can't trade it internationally. I think that's something that everybody has to recognize, and that's across the board. The other thing is that we can provide risk guarantees, and those risk guarantees, say, for instance, a large Indian corporate would come in and say, oh, we want to do this, and what's the price for a risk guarantee? All of these things will have price, right? Everything will have a price. And as Santosh very clearly pointed out, that price, and you did as well, that price is going to go up, because the later we do it, the less we have a problem, until it gets to a point where it collapses, and then we've lost already. So there's an opportunity cost for that. And there should be a sense of fear of missing out for financial institutions, not just multilaterals, but everybody. So that's one way. The other thing that we should probably look at doing is supporting local financial institutions. My colleague said to me one day they don't know how to price hydrogen deals, which was interesting, because they said we don't know how to compare it versus green and grey hydrogen. Well, then that's a great example of where a new product's needed. And it's not, I think it will be more than the insurability product. I think it will be a component of capital at risk, and then operational risk and insurability. The term blended finance gets bandied around a lot, but actually blended finance is, basically plugging as many holes in a leaking bucket as you can, and to keep the water in that bucket. So I think you'll find that there'll be an opportunity for innovation, and I think innovation dislikes uncertainty, which is strange, really, because innovation should be designed to deal with uncertainty. But we need to keep in mind, what can we do to build confidence? What can we do to attract more money? That's what I think we need to keep our focus on.
Thanks, Steve, on that. So thanks for this very, very interesting and stimulating debate and discussion. What we're going to do over the next few weeks, as you would have all received email from my colleague Nish, we've scheduled a weekly call Wednesday. Most of them will be at the same time, but in a couple of instances, our key people are traveling, or they're only available in the morning hours of the time zone in India, in which case our European or other international colleagues may not be able to participate. But by and large, we'll stick to the same time slot. So do have a look at the schedule once again, and if there are topics that you want to contribute to, do you want to be a key discussant, lead discussant, then just drop us an email or a WhatsApp message, and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. So these workshops will run definitively until mid-November. And then thereafter, we've got a very, very major event planned 28th and 29th of November in partnership with the various arms of the Indian government and the G20 Secretariat, which is the Climate, Green Hydrogen and Energy Transition Financing Summit. It takes place in New Delhi. And we expect to have a very large number of investors who are either keen, sitting on the fence, or already with their hats thrown into the ring will participate. So just do mark those dates. Every week we're going to discuss a particular topic. So that didn't get discussed today, then please feel free to jump in and be a contributor to the paper. And at the end of the year, or rather in November, when the series finishes, we're going to release 2 reports. One is a library of comprehensive library of financing instruments, largely focused on blended finance, and how do you apply those in the Indian context. So a lot of what was said today, of course, can be applied globally, but India will have its own nuances, own policy constructs. So how do you apply those structures and instruments in the Indian context? So again, these reports and papers are already mentioned in the framework document that you all have received. So that's what's going to happen in the next 2 months, and then 2024. We're going to start focusing on implementation. And the one bit I forgot to mention, which Arun alluded to, which is we must do these large, high-impact commercial scale demonstration projects, which are absolutely crucial and essential to establish benchmarks and precedences. So so watch out for an email from us on an expression or call for expression of interest for projects that you and your organizations might want to do, and then we'll try and create a financing ecosystem and implementation ecosystem around those. So do watch out for that notification as well. On that note, thank you to all my lead discussants. Thank you all the members of the workshop, people who've taken valuable time to come in and contribute and or listen to what's being discussed. And thank you to my colleagues, GH2, both in Delhi as well as in Geneva. And a special thanks to Mr. Jyotilal joining us from Kerala. Thank you, sir. As always, as I said, you're quite an inspiration. And I could not also thank enough MNRE for allowing us to use their meeting rooms to run this webinar from their offices. So folks, stay tuned and look forward to meeting you in the subsequent workshops. Have a good day.